Hi, everyone. Welcome to Music Talk here from McNally Robinson on Treaty 6 territory, homeland of the Métis. My guest tonight is Tania Miller. Tania, welcome home.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be back.
It is always such a pleasure to have you here. I know, on top of getting to make music with some of the people you probably grew up in music at music school with here in Saskatchewan, you also get to see family, friends. It is such a thrill to follow you around the globe and then bring you back home.
I feel so happy to come back home, and as you say, I have such a fond memory of so many people that I've made music with over the years. I'm looking forward to working with the Saskatchewan Symphony this week. It's going to be great.
Yeah. You probably, I was thinking about this the other day, you probably in university you might have had Brian Unverricht teach you a class or two or something, because on he did brass techniques for so long, and so I was thinking about that the other day. It's kind of neat that arc of how music communities have that long timeline that isn't just nobody's around from then anymore. It's that connection.
Absolutely. I think that we all learn music in a very intimate way. As friends, we learn to take risks. We learn to be honest with each other. All of these things are, these experiences I've had with wise people like Brian Unverricht, for instance, have really impacted me as I've gone on to conduct.
Nice. So tonight you can add your comments and questions to the chat. They get, through the magic of the internet, beamed to my phone, which we get to keep up with the questions on. So please do. And you've had a very busy pandemic. You've been conducting through the whole thing. It's been fun to watch your explorations, your quarantines, the concerts you get to do. What's it been like to? I mean, this is a big career shift all of a sudden to have a pandemic. Conductors, particularly those of you who travel the globe, that was a big change. It
was a shock for all of us in all of our different ways. For the arts, it was particularly shocking to be literally, for many orchestras, in the middle of a dress rehearsal and to find out at the end of the dress rehearsal that the concert wasn't going to happen. And to see that sense of quietness kind of descend. But what was amazing is how incredible so many orchestras were to so quickly, just like the Saskatoon Symphony, to go into the way of communicating and connecting to their audiences through digital media and just continuing to bring music to people. I think it was incredible.
To see that connection was really unique.
And I think people through the pandemic have understood how music affects them, why they need that feeling of sharing music together, and feeling how music makes them feel, how it understands their variety of emotions and experiences, and that we want to travel and go on a journey somehow, and we do that through the music, through the experience of music. So even in the early days of the pandemic, when we lost the chance to be with each other inside the concert hall, there were still many beautiful things happening. But having said that, also, for me, the preciousness of being on the podium with musicians, with an audience, has become so precious, very, very important to me. And it's helped me as a conductor to truly live much more in the present. I had the situation through the last 2 years where each day I would study my score and I would say, enjoy this very important moment of this meaningful moment of just being with the music. You might not make it to the rehearsal. The concert, many of my concerts were canceled as I was studying for those concerts. Many things were sometimes canceled 2 or 3 days before. And sometimes you're in the middle of a rehearsal, and again, with the musicians, I think we've come to the true feeling of treasuring this moment where we're making music together. It's a rehearsal, but we're loving every moment, and we might not get the next rehearsal. And so I feel very fortunate that I've had as many concerts as I have had. I feel very fortunate to have traveled to Korea twice, for instance, but not without some strange things to have to endure. When I went to Korea the first time, 2 weeks quarantine, one small room. I was never let outside of that room, and I had 3 meals, cold meals, brought to me every day. And it was sort of a human challenge to see what is it like to be alone for 2 weeks. And I think all of these struggles have helped me become a better musician. Certainly, I'm more interested in why music impacts us so much, and I think I'm more in tune with the effects that music has on our lives and how all of our struggles impact our creativity.
Yeah, I know that for us, we learned so much about what we actually do. And I hope all arts organizations kind of had that realization. You know, we tend to get stuck in the machine. You know, next concert, prepping next year. This is what's up next, and you sort of end up forgetting how much the magic of music actually means to an audience. And like you say, the digitalness of it all actually worked too, because people needed something to connect to, and I hope those online concerts gave a sense of normality in a very unnormal time.
Well, I think we had some very great opportunities through this digital time because we could do a lot of education initiatives. We could talk to audiences in a more intimate way. We could have one-on-one conversations. We could do things around music where we brought people into the process or behind the scenes. So there are many ways that we can share the experience of music with people, and I am happy that we did learn a lot about ourselves and what our audiences can draw from the experience of music, but also what we are capable of. I think almost every orchestra that has filmed a concert didn't believe they could before. They didn't know how to do it. They didn't know how to film the right players playing the right music, and they didn't know exactly how the process would unfold. But when forced to, we actually did heroic things, didn't we?
We did, and not only did heroic things, overachieved. I'm particularly proud of Canadian orchestras. I mean, something like 95% of us went digital very quickly, and like you say, the educational opportunity, the accessibility for me was the big thing. You know, I grew up like you, hours away from a city with an orchestra, and you know, when I was young, my family would bring me to concerts sometimes when they could, but you can't come to everything. And all of a sudden, people in these rural communities who are isolated had access to live music. We have a couple in Maple Creek, Saskatchewan, who they used to come up to one concert a year. And I remember a few years ago when we were doing our Joni Mitchell concert, they were coming to that, and there was a massive snowstorm, and it broke their hearts because that was their concert that they were coming to. And now they watch every concert. They get dressed up to watch every concert in their living room. That connection to the community of music really became such a remarkable benchmark and hopefully a permanency now in classical music that you don't have to just be in the hall for it, although it is better in the hall.
Well, I personally feel strongly that although it's fantastic to connect to people online, I feel so deeply connected to music in a hall because there is this energy that you can't feel through a screen. You feel a connection of the actual vibrations, of the actual energy, whether it's an elevated, excited energy, whether it's a hushed energy, whether it's a moment of stillness. I'm amazed inside a music experience how there is a sense that whatever's going on in your life somehow is reflected by what you're experiencing. There is a connection that you make in a very intimate way to the experience. And I'm also amazed at the idea that when a symphony is building and climaxing and growing something very, very big, that an entire room is experiencing that same swelling together. And I can tell you just from being on a podium as a conductor and sharing the experience just with the musicians alone, like being there, feeling their power and feeling their response and vice versa. It is just so beautiful, and I'm so glad that we are finally coming back to having those experiences again.
Yeah, it's. I think probably all of us. I know we have at the SSO. There's moments where you feel more emotional about our work, than we did pre-pandemic, just because like you said earlier, I mean, it's precious. A lot of it was taken for granted before, because you could just go to a concert and hop on a plane and be somewhere, and now those things, when they change so dramatically, it really did leave us hopefully a new legacy for music making.
Well, I think we learned some beautiful things about being alone, and being alone with ourselves, and having space, which I think the world needed a little bit of space to just feel what they wanted to feel, process what was important to them, to reflect on who you are and why you are and what you're doing in your lives. All these things were some of the positive things, but also just to realize how much we missed each other. And after a while, we really just wanted to be with people, when we couldn't get together with family, when we couldn't get together with friends. And now I feel the same way about concerts, because we come together, we see each other. Some of us are still a little bit nervous about that, but we're slowly coming back, and we're slowly sharing experiences together and enjoying those moments together. And I think truly, for sure, we understand how important they are and how meaningful they are to us.
Did you take up any strange pandemic habit? Because it's funny how many, particularly touring musicians, your schedules pre-pandemic were crazy. I often joke that I'm quite grateful that I run an orchestra, and I mean, I do a lot of travel for work, but it's mostly my office is my office. You guys on planes constantly, going places, doing things. When you had the downtime, did you take up baking or gardening, or did you get to experience something other?
I certainly did. Well, first of all, of course, I did a lot of baking like everybody else, whenever I could get my hands on some flour or yeast.
Right.
But what was really great for me was I learned that I love to write. And I had this dream to write a book, which of course was overextending myself. So I started off by writing articles. And just the process of writing articles, thinking about why I wanted to say what I wanted to say, and just the creativity involved in creating a thought, and kind of going, and sometimes how thoughts would sort of pour out of me at certain times. There would be moments where I'd wrestle it, and it would take me an entire day and I couldn't come up with what I was after. And then there'd be other times where I would go for a long walk, and during the walk, an entire long article, almost word for word, would come through my head. That creative process for me was so fantastic, and I needed that time to explore that side of myself. So it was very precious for me in that way, and I think it helped me think about why I do what I do, what the importance of music is. I explored a lot about the mind, and how our mind works when we perform, how we get into the zone, a lot of these sort of performance aspects. So I did a lot of research as well. Like, I learned a lot. So I feel like it was a great time, just on a personal level, to enrich that side.
Nice. They were phenomenal articles. We shared them amongst the staff. I know we shared them on social media. There was insight, and it was a great opportunity for all of us to learn a little bit more about ourselves.
Sure.
I mean, as difficult and as challenging as the pandemic has been, hopefully that is a silver lining. One of the silver linings is that we get to have you back here and on stage with us this weekend. So let's talk about a few of the pieces on the show. We're going to start with the Mozart. We're joined by Jane Coop, the incredible pianist Jane Coop, who you two have worked together before.
Yes.
Many times, yes. Jane hasn't been here in years. Jane was supposed to be here 2 years ago. She was one of the first concerts canceled in our pandemic. And so we're thrilled to finally get her back here. Mozart 24 is, boy, it starts off dramatic. Listening to it, it's a question. I think he's posing a question that it would, particularly with that orchestral opening, and the piano gets to have a dialogue.
I think what's really amazing about, first of all, this Mozart Piano Concerto number 24 is arguably the most important of his piano concerti. It's only one of two that are in a minor key, and it's that minor pathos sort of drama that actually in the first movement makes me think that we are on our way towards Beethoven. In fact, I can't help but think that Beethoven might have been influenced by that piece, by that movement, and by the spirit of that movement. I hear the fiery power of Beethoven's future music right there in this dramatic music of Mozart. So it's quite different from many of his very sweet piano concerti. And I think it's beautiful too in that one of the things that's so incredible about Mozart is he writes these beautiful wind octets, basically 2 flutes, 2 clarinets, 2 oboes, and 2 bassoons. And there, when you hear these groupings of the winds, there's something very unique to Mozart in those. And in, for instance, the second movement, you hear a lot of this back and forth between a absolutely solo piano, very, very alone, and then this commentary back and forth between the winds and this lonely piano. And the third movement is a variation. It starts out so simple that it's something like Happy Birthday to You or something like that. It's very, very simple, and then he creates variations on that. So it's a lovely concerto. I know that Jane will play it beautifully. She's such a lovely Mozart player. And yeah, one of the best.
It's funny you say Beethoven, because that second movement to me also has that foreshadowing of Beethoven, because I often think of particularly the second movements, the slow movements, or prayers. And this second movement has that prayer-like quality to it. It has that, like you say, the call and response, that responsorialness of church music at that time. And it does feel like prayer rather than romance.
For sure.
It's a really wonderful moment. I love also that because that piece, Jane picked that piece. That was when we had originally, she was coming originally for Beethoven 3, and then part of a Beethoven festival that never happened. and then
still can do it.
No, exactly. So so then she said, I really want to do 24. And I remember, letting you know it's 24, and you came back with Tchaikovsky 5, and I went, well, that's perfect, because the two of them, they share that sense of drama. It's funny. I mean, Tchaikovsky's Fifth Symphony, it's one of the war horses of our repertoire, of our industry, part of the canon, as we like to call it. And I often find it such a departure from what he had done previously. He's stepping out on his own, like you say, in the Mozart. It's also a departure from the sweetness of particularly 22 and Concerto 22 and 23. All of a sudden we have Symphony 5, and there's this prolonged sense of drama, because he's given us an idea that he continues to give us throughout the entire work.
One thing that's very special about Tchaikovsky's Symphony No. 5 is that there is a certain theme which opens the first movement. Bum, ba ba bum, ba ba bum, bum. And this theme is actually, I call it the storyteller theme in my own mind, because this theme happens and then it kind of fades away, and then out of nowhere comes these very, very hushed pianissimo string chords that are in a march. So it's almost, I imagine the storyteller imagining, and out of his imagination comes this. But what's unique is that this theme, this storyteller theme, it is in each of the movements, and it shows up in different characters. So there are certain times where it comes in a very angry or very wild, violent almost way. It shows up at the end of the third movement in a dance-like way. It shows up in the beginning of the last movement in a very proud and almost heroic, almost victorious way. And so something that started off in an uncertain way becomes something that has overcome those obstacles. I feel like the beginning of the second movement is so heartfelt. There's so much beauty in this music, and I never get tired of conducting it. It's a piece I know so well, and I've conducted many times, but each time for me is a life of soaring passion, from the most melancholy, the most sad, the most inner heartfelt of music to the most exuberant, the most victorious, the most exciting. And the fact that he was able to do that in such a beautiful way with all of these melodies that just pour one on top of the other, I find it absolutely fascinating. And it's that energy that's in this music just never it gets tired. I can hear this piece again and again, interpreted so many different ways, and I think it really does move people. So I'm excited to be here conducting that.
How do you prepare for the opportunity to bring a theme like that? You know, I mean, Beethoven does it obviously in Symphony 5, where the motive, the rhythmic motive, comes back. But how do you prepare? How do you pace that as you're preparing the orchestra? And it's a fascinating thing because that theme is done so many different ways. It could become, standard, boring. But how do you work that into the way you give the arc to the piece?
I think actually the reason why it never gets boring in this case is because there's so much emotion inside the music. So it never stops moving you. And when you're conducting it, when I'm conducting it, I am always moved in that moment by the actual sound of the music. And so for that reason, it never feels like it gets tired or old or the same because it's constantly changing. And that's the thing that's amazing about music is that it does change every time you do it because you are changed. Whatever we're going through in this time period in this world at this moment is going to find itself in that music. And so for that reason, it really it's so rich. I think the material is so rich and it's so connected to the human experience that we cannot help but change with and feel anew with this music. It's different from music that maybe some music, for instance, in a classical era, where the purpose of the music is elegance or to be intelligent,
entertainment.
Yeah, or exactly, or to be a dance. The purpose was to be a dance, or that the incredible aspect of the music was how innovative and clever the composer was to take a theme and to invert it and to do it 10 different ways, and it all fits together like a beautiful puzzle. So on the intellectual level, it's stunning. But what that music is doing is it's impressing us. It's showing us beauty and elegance. It has absolutely a purpose. But this is about emotion. And this is about the human experience of feeling those emotions. And that, I think, is why Tchaikovsky is always speaking to us and always will.
Yeah. And I mean, because he had an emotional life. He had a unique perspective on life. No composer's sexuality is talked about more than Tchaikovsky's, and,
Right.
and the struggles of his own mental health because of that, and
Yeah.
and the relationship he had with his public, with his government, with his family, with Nadezhda von Meck, who was his supporter at this time still. It's hard for someone with that much life experience to not have poured that kind of energy into his music.
Yeah.
And you feel that electricity still in it today. A few weeks ago, I reached out to you and said, "What do we do about Tchaikovsky?" Because, of course, our world is in a state of horror, really, with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And many orchestras have been pushing Russian music off the program. And I was so grateful that you came back with the same feelings that I had, in that art is important more so than its perceived political statement. This was not a political statement piece by Tchaikovsky. Some composers did indeed write political pieces, some of them, of course, against Russia. But this was not a political statement by Russia or by Tchaikovsky. This was an emotional outpouring of art. And then there's all the discussions around the fact that Tchaikovsky's grandparents were Ukrainian. He summered in Ukraine. I'm really grateful that you came back to me with the answer you did, because I don't like the idea of removing Tchaikovsky, Russian music in general from programs, because I don't know that that actually furthers the conversation.
Well, I think for me, it's just really important to be very, very true and very specific to each situation. We have all felt such incredible horror and pain, and want to do our part in whatever way we can. And I think that everybody's reactions in what to do and how to do it have, validity. But in the case of art, of the arts, I think, first of all, in terms of music that has been created, there is art. Art itself is a creation unto itself. If it is without a story, if it's without any political background, some reason to create a political background or story to it, then I think the art form itself needs to be treasured as an art form, and to remain neutral and not somehow moved around at the whim of what's going on amongst humans at different times in history. And I think, whether it's for a good reason or for a negative reason, this is very important. Art lives unto itself, and it speaks to each of us in its own unique way. And even from the time that it was written by Tchaikovsky until now, this music is now traveling in its own world, and it's kind of in its own creative world. So I am glad that we were able to, basically honor the individual Tchaikovsky, a man who struggled, a man who sought to create something beautiful and did, and that all of us here will experience that. The struggles that are in his music are actually, very much part of the struggles of the world right now.
Yeah, and struggles of oppression, which resonate today, and it's a way for us, I hope, to be able to have a bit of cathartic release, because this music does go from it takes you through, particularly this symphony. I mean, there literally every emotion. It's like a paint by number emotion. You get all of them in there, to the triumph at the end. That exciting sensation of success that I hope resonates. It will. It can't not.
It gives us hope.
It does.
I mean, that's what we need right now. We need the arts to give us hope, give us a sense of renewal, again, a sense of things. That there is a good coming for the pandemic alone, to come out of the pandemic and to know that there's a time of renewal, that it's spring and we have something to look forward to. We can potentially come back together again. And music, such as Tchaikovsky's symphony, gives us hope too in time of war, to surpass and to rise above it.
It's funny you'd say that. So we before this started, we were just chatting about the last 2 years and how we've been doing, and early on in the pandemic when we started live streaming. It's funny, you said we all started doing things we'd never done before. We'd never live streamed a concert, and particularly not only had we as an organization done it, but the people in the booth had never done it. I get to call the cameras alongside Simeon, so I remember finishing that first concert and looking at each other and be like, "Holy crap, we just live streamed a concert," and we started hearing back from our patrons and people who had been subscribers for decades, and people who were watching because they had nothing else to go and do. And we actually ended up changing our mission statement. So previously, the mission statement for the SSO was something, I'm sure written in the 80s, which was like, the Saskatchewan Symphony Orchestra provides professional music and through education and concerts. And it was very formal. It was very dry. And that fall, we actually had a retreat of the board, and some of the staff came, and we were discussing what the streaming had actually made us realize. And so we changed our mission statement to be: the Saskatchewan Symphony Orchestra shares the joy, hope, and community of making music.
Beautiful.
And that's it. Because at the end of the day, actually, that's what we do.
That's true.
And so as you started talking about hope, that is that is what music can be in these incredible times.
Absolutely.
You've paired this symphony with the opening piece by Andrew Balfour. Andrew, of course, is a composer from Winnipeg. We've done his music before. Phenomenal ideas in his music, and this piece pairs instantly perfectly with the Tchaikovsky.
It does, because it's called Peter's Dream, and it's actually inspired by a piece that Tchaikovsky wrote called A Hymn to the Cherubim. This is a beautiful hymn. I really recommend to all of your audiences to go online and find Tchaikovsky's Hymn of the Cherubim and listen to it. It's just beautiful. And so what's interesting is that when Tchaikovsky wrote this music, it was actually banned by the church at the time. Actually, not even banned by the church, but an official in the church who it only went so far, and it was, no, you can't have this music. That we have rules, and this music doesn't fit into the rules. And it was a very blanket ban. Somebody just said no, and that was it. So Peter Jurgensen was Tchaikovsky's publisher, and he fought the battle for Tchaikovsky's music to be heard and for it not to be banned. It was a very long battle. He won it, and from that point on, so much other music was also able to be performed. So here's a classic example of art being somehow set free, basically, and that Tchaikovsky himself was struggling with that as well.
Yeah. What is the Balfour like? It's strings only, if I recall.
It's strings only. It's absolutely beautiful, because the Hymn for the Cherubim is a beautiful a cappella choir piece. Very beautiful and slow, elegant, and this piece reflects that of Andrew's. So I think Andrew's a wonderful composer. This piece was written for Tafel Music. It was premiered by them in 2019, so it's a really new piece, and probably hasn't been performed very much in Canada.
I think this might be the second performance. Like it's not been done often.
Yeah, so I'm excited that your audiences will hear it.
And really interesting that we actually have a piece. We're opening a concert next season, although it hasn't. It's part of our Northern Lights Festival next year. We're actually opening a piece with one of his pieces as well. We haven't announced that yet, so as I'm saying it out loud, I'm going, "Whoa."
Wait, that's a secret.
But yeah, we get to open with one of his choral pieces actually,
Okay.
because he does such incredible choral writing,
Yeah.
and he's quite a choral conductor as well.
Well, you can feel that in this music.
Yeah.
I mean, it's beautifully written for strings, but it is essentially a sung piece.
Yeah.
So it's choral oriented.
Yeah, it's really cool. One of the questions that has come in is, what has it been like having to conduct in a mask? So as a symphony manager now for almost a decade, it hurts to watch you guys have to try and communicate with the expressiveness of your face gone.
Yes.
Because what the audience doesn't see or hadn't seen until we started streaming things, how expressive the tiniest facial movements can be to changing the music.
Yeah.
What was that like to all of a sudden lose?
It was actually for all of us. I think when we all started wearing masks, even just going to the grocery store, we felt like we had no personality anymore. I felt like I was lost for a while, like that I was truly cut off. So that was an interesting experience. And then after a while, when we got used to the masks, we all, just kept carrying on. We weren't so psychologically blocked. But as a conductor, it was really difficult as well, because, again, so much of your communication comes through your face, especially the way that you can be affirmative. You can give a smile which says, I really liked what you just played. You can give a wink or a nudge, or you can show a lot of extra intensity from your face when you want something. So these things at first were lost. In my first rehearsals, when I was rehearsing through a mask, I would get a sore throat because I was trying to project two players through a mask. Again, all of these things I got used to. I despise conducting concerts in a mask. I've learned to live with rehearsing in a mask. And then if I can unveil my face for the concert, it's always beautiful, because then we actually get to share, because so much of music is sharing. And when you have the mask, it's difficult. But I have done many concerts as well with masks, and that was also interesting because then I truly felt like I was allowing the music to come through me, and that I no longer existed. So that my way of communicating was not so much through my face or through me, but rather that I was just a conduit or some sort of place where the music would come through what I was doing. So there was a bit more space in how I felt about music. And I think we all, in a certain way, it's as if we lost our sight and our hearing became more acute. So I think we started to focus on different ways to share music, and we learned from those.
Did you have to do any concerts distanced with distancing in musicians?
Oh, yes. In fact, there was one concert I did with the Vancouver Symphony where they created an entire separate stage away from the stage, so that I was several feet away. I was kind of maybe around the fourth row of the audience. That was just a very challenging situation because so much of musicians, people often say, well, the musicians don't seem to be looking at you. Are they really watching you? And you say, oh, yes, of course they're watching. They know when they need to really look up. But really, so much of what we do is through periphery. We sense what the gestures are. We know, kind of how to look. And when the conductor's not even in the space, and they're in another room, that's an impossible task. And it was impossible for the musicians if they were really far apart as well. So musicians have struggled to make good music, like to make music that they feel good about.
Yeah. That periphery vision is so true. I mean, just watching all of a sudden, something as simple as principal oboe and principal flute not sitting side by side. Yeah. And here during last season, there were times when we were required to have them 4 meters apart. Yeah. We started with, I think we were 2 meters apart with plexiglass, and then the province said no, it has to be 3 meters, and then eventually they went to 4 meters. And watching that progression of just the challenge of not having, like you say, it's not even that you're looking; it's the periphery. It's that spidey sense that musicians have trained themselves to have. Yeah. And you just had that taken away from you. Yeah. And it was something we all rely on so heavily because it becomes so intuitive. Yeah. Distance challenges when we had a concert last year where our principal timpanist Daryl had to play a half beat ahead of the orchestra so that acoustically it made it at the same time. Yeah. I'm not sure if we learned much from that other than how, like you say, how precious the experience is and not take that for granted.
It is amazing, though, how we adjust, though. Yeah. We all have adjusted to many different things, and it like the art will find its way eventually. It's so interesting that you say, I used to play pipe organ. In fact, I used to play pipe organ here on 20th Street here in Saskatoon at St. Thomas Wesley. And one thing that's really interesting about a pipe organ is that the larger the pipes, of course, the greater the amount of air that has to go through, so the longer it takes for the sound to emerge. So when you play a pipe organ, the pedals have to be played ahead. So your feet have to hit the pedals ahead of your hands because your hands are playing smaller pipes. And no matter whatever you play on a pipe organ is ahead of what the sound will be. So there's a delay because the air has to go through the pipes, and then there's a difference of delay between the feet and the hands. And still, eventually your brain figures it out, and it just becomes very natural. But
I never figured it out. Yeah. I worked as a music director for a church here in town, and they wanted me to do the organ, and I finally said to them one day, it's not worth it. Let's hire someone. I'm quite good at the piano. Let's just hire someone to do the other part. Because I just, like you said, it was the particularly the foot reaction had to be earlier. Yeah. And it was an older instrument, and it wasn't quite as functional as it could have been. Yes. Which added to its own quirkiness. Right. This is a good question that has come in. Other than the weather, What do you love most about the prairies?
Yes, well, I have to tell you that today I started in Vancouver and I went for a lovely walk in the spring forest with my dog, all green around me. And then today, as I flew into Saskatchewan, I couldn't even see the ground until we almost landed because of the snow swirling around me. But I do love the snow. I do miss Saskatchewan very much. For sure, I always have to say the people. I really always feel like I recognize one of my own whenever I come across a Saskatchewan person. And just the warmth and the caring and the kindness and the community that you feel here amongst Saskatchewan people is something that I always look forward to and I'm happy to come back to.
And everyone will talk to you.
Absolutely.
Grocery store, coffee shop,
Yeah.
they will tell you their whole life story right there.
That's good.
One of the questions that's come in, do you approach a collaboration differently when it's with an established artist like Jane Cooper you've worked with a number of times than you would someone who's brand new to a piece?
Well, so when you are working with any artist, it's really an intimate chance to understand each other and to, most importantly, with a solo artist, it's their piece. They have an interpretation that they want to present. I, as the conductor, am there to support them in their vision of the piece. However, I am also a conductor with a connection to all of these composers and experience with all of these composers. So sometimes it's a real collaboration of, working with someone and helping them create the best interpretation. If they're new to the piece, they might not have some of these senses of what's going on in the orchestra, for instance, or whatever that might be. But most of the time, I'm there just to support who it is. It doesn't matter if I know this person or if I've worked with them before. We get right to the music, usually in a rehearsal that I have with a soloist before the first rehearsal with the orchestra. We sit down, the soloist will play through sometimes the entire concerto, or sometimes just parts where, let's hear what your tempo is here and what are the unique things that are, I should be aware of. And each one's different. So, usually the music speaks for itself.
It is actually quite fascinating to watch how conductors and artists work together to create something as on a concerto. It's one of those special things I actually wish more of the audience could see because it is, particularly when you watch like a violin concerto or piano concerto, the audience is blown away by the virtuosity often or the scope even. So many people are blown away that they can sit and play like that and collaborate with an orchestra from memory. It's a incredible thing. But watching the rehearsal process, particularly the first rehearsal, to me is always so fascinating because you do have little conversations about how do you want this or where do you want this and then in the moment it'll go slightly different and you'll find a compromise or it's a fascinating artistic process that happens so quick.
It does happen very quickly. We only have one working rehearsal, usually within 2 hours or an hour and a half. That's the only amount of time we have. And then we have a dress rehearsal where we play it again, but talk very little. But even in the very first working rehearsal, the general strategy is for the orchestra to understand what the soloist is going to say and to understand what directions they're going to move in so that they can be there. But also, we do truly impact each other because concertos are truly back and forth communications. So it's amazing how the tempo I choose to start, or vice versa, the tempo they choose to start, will impact how the orchestra parts are and how we influence each other and how it does kind of take on a personality through the process. And then, of course, once we play through things and kind of get a feel for each other, then there's always aspects of the orchestra that we want to, make it so that it's more clean, so everybody understands exactly what's happening, and that process of just making it really crystal clear so everybody can hear what the soloist is doing.
Yeah. So I'm going to end with one last question that came in, and I like it because, as we mentioned, you're from Saskatchewan. If I recall correctly, the last time you were here, I introduced you as the pride of Foam Lake, and we had people on our social media who say, "Hey, now Outlook gets a bit of acclaim too." And that was because if I recall, you taught band in Outlook.
That's right.
Yeah. Did you have an aha moment when you realized you wanted to be a conductor?
It was, for me, it was an emerging thing because I started off being a piano player. I just didn't know that I was going to be a conductor. I didn't have any conductors in my world growing up in Foam Lake. But I did have many aha moments. Basically, every time I stood up and conducted. When I was an undergraduate at the University of Saskatchewan, we had to take conducting classes. First aha moment. Second one was when I was a pipe organist here in Saskatoon, and the choir director didn't come for work one day, and I was 19, and they said, "You conduct them." So second aha moment, and I started taking conducting courses in the summers, and I became very passionate about it, quite frankly, and just being in Outlook and teaching. I wanted to be the best communicator I could be. So all of these things led to me realizing that this is what I really wanted, and my true chance to be a conductor came when I went off to the University of Michigan and truly studied conducting. I always feel like that was the beginning of a new era for me.
Yeah. Well, thank God it was, because
I'm
you are
so glad too.
one of Canada's best conducting experts of all time. So
thank
you so much for being here with us this week, and enjoy every moment of Tchaikovsky Maskless.
And I hope you.
We
all
will.
too.
We will. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone here at McNally Robinson. A big cheers to Rowan and the crew who are so welcoming to us all year for these music talks at McNally, particularly in this very strange time when instead of audience we had cameras. So thank you so much. See you this Saturday at the Symphony.
See you soon.